Good evening. Welcome to tonight's On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers. Tonight's show is 2 hours long and live, so if you have any questions for my guest during the show, text them to 87778 with the word EDGE, a space, and then your name, location, and your message, and we'll try to pick up on any that really hit the mark. They're all charged at standard rate, so why not get ready to text? It's rare to have a guest on this show who has the in-depth knowledge to discuss as many subjects as we will tonight and make sense of them all. However, tonight's guest, who was on this show almost exactly 1 year ago today, has just that skill set. By way of demonstration, he has just published a book which tackles subjects as diverse as UFOs, pyramids, psychic phenomena, crop circles, 2012, religious apparitions, visions of the future, NASA's claimed moon landings, 9/11, the war on terror, and the Illuminati. And he manages to pull all of these subjects into a cohesive whole. So whatever your taste in alternative realities, I am certain that you are going to enjoy this show. The book is called The Truth Agenda, Making Sense of the Unexplained Mysteries, Global Cover-Ups, and 2012 Prophecies. My guest is Andy Thomas. What a show we've got tonight. Welcome, Andy.
Nice to be here.
Nice to see you again after almost exactly a year.
Indeed.
Last year, when we met on this show, we talked about crop circles, but since then you've produced this book, which I've got to say is, to me, this is like conspiracy theory 101. It's, you know, it's for somebody who wants to get into the subject as well as people who already know a lot about it. It's incredibly in-depth. It's got loads of fabulous photographs. It covers so many subjects and makes a lot of sense out of them all. I think we spoke before the show, obviously, and you were saying that it's kind of about making a difference, isn't it? It's give me an idea of what your motivation was.
I think the problem that we've got at the moment is that there's so much of this stuff, all of the things that you've mentioned, floating around in the ether. Everybody who's interested in alternative things, they're talking about all of this stuff, from the paranormal to conspiracy to global politics, and yet trying to see where it all fits together is very difficult, especially if you're new to it. And I'm very lucky in that I'm out there doing lectures for quite mainstream groups. And I've been doing that about things like crop circles and whatever for years, which seem on the surface reasonably harmless. So they're quite happy for you to go there and speak about that. But increasingly, over the years, I've become more and more involved with these other mysteries and cover-ups and all of this stuff. And what I've realised is that there's a lot more interest in all of this than people think. But giving them one coherent sort of source to start with, okay, what does all this mean, I think has been missing. So I thought, well, I'll have to try and write something that does that. And the Truth Agenda is an attempt to try to pull this together so that if somebody says, so what is this all about? You know, I've just heard you talk or whatever, but I need to know more. And hopefully this is a source they can go to, which will, you know, open the door to all this world of all the stuff that you're used to as well.
So is it your perception then that people are becoming more conscious, more aware of this stuff, and that they're going on the internet, they're hearing about things like, say, chemtrails or 9/11, and they're going on the internet, or they're buying books and they're discovering stuff and they're going, oh, is that your understanding?
I'm constantly surprised by how so-called normal people are actually much more open to this kind of stuff than we're told. I mean, the mainstream and what we see, you know, on the television and here on the radio is so narrow in what it focuses us all into. And yet, when I talk to people, be it addressing the Women's Institute, a Rotary Club, or whatever, anything like that, the amount of people who, at the end, having seen a presentation about all these things, will say, well, you know, yeah, I've always thought there was something going on. I've always thought there was something funny about 9/11, and they will surprise you. And you realise that people out there are more switched on than we think. They have more questions than we think, particularly to do with things like global warming, which even the polls are now saying. People question it more than the mainstream is reflecting.
Even the polls are now saying they're not getting warm. Is that what you're saying? Like the North Pole
the pole. Well, I didn't see that poll. There are two different kinds of polls.
I know,
that's
three,
right.
actually, if you think about it, at least.
But no, very good. But yeah, no, when they take votes, let's use that word, from the public, people are not sure because they sense there's something uneasy at the heart of it, that they're being sold something which is not necessarily an absolute. Not that I'm saying in the book global warming does or doesn't exist, but there is a debate to be had which is not being had in the mainstream, and it's the kind of thing people feel in their hearts they're not being allowed to speak out about. And 9/11 is another issue, but when they see somebody else voicing these questions, suddenly it's amazing how quickly they will come forward with their own feelings about it.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, for instance, people like Al Gore saying the science is set on global warming, but then there are plenty of scientists who say, no, it isn't, there is no proof.
It's astonishing how many mainstream climatologists do question it. And yet when people like David Bellamy, the TV naturalist, of course, when he voiced his views that, look, I'm not convinced that global warming's where it's at, I mean, he was vilified. I mean, he feels it damaged his career. But he stands firm that he did the right thing to voice those views. And but Nigel Lawson, you know, ex-Chancellor of the Exchequer, we've got high-level people here saying this, but plus the climatologists and people like Peter Taylor, who worked for the EU and the UN, are saying this model is not right. We haven't understood it properly.
A hockey stick model.
Well, yes, the Al Gore hockey stick chart has been challenged by so many people.
Well, it was challenged in court, wasn't it?
And it was and indeed found to be wrong on 9 major points. But that's not to say, obviously, that we shouldn't care about the climate, but we need to know how we should best care for the climate. And when you've got climatologists saying, actually, we're looking at solar cycles affecting us and it might be global cooling, I think we need to be looking at being prepared for both outcomes. To just shut one avenue down, I believe, is wrong and not good. But the point here is that people want to debate it. They want to be able to voice their views that actually they do believe ghosts exist, or that they think not all crop circles are man-made. And when you give them that chance, it's amazing what the average person will come up with, and they will open up very quickly.
And yet, you know, it seems that the words conspiracy theorist have become such a dirty word, haven't they? That people who are badged conspiracy theorists are basically not far short of lunatics, according to the mainstream media.
Well, the term, as you say, conspiracy theorist, we need to reevaluate it because technically it's an accurate term. There are people that theorise over potential conspiracies, and I mean, history is littered with conspiracies. We know they're going on now, we know they've gone on in the past, so why not theorise over them? But as you say, that word conspiracy theorist, or that term, is used as if the very application of that term means the person they're aiming that at is a nutter, an anorak with no views that should be treated seriously, and that's so completely wrong.
Well, isn't it a conspiracy theory that 19 Muslims armed with box cutters, directed by Osama bin Laden in a cave in Afghanistan, committed the crimes of 9/11?
Well, that was one of the things when George Bush said, let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories about 9/11. He didn't seem to realise that the bin Laden story is in itself a conspiracy theory, of course.
And bin Laden isn't even wanted by the FBI for 9/11.
No, due to lack of evidence, apparently, which it surprises some people.
And yet
but
we went
it says
to
a
war
lot.
with Afghanistan.
We did, yes. Well, they would argue that they also want him for other terrorist things, but whether bin Laden's even still there is, I think, highly open to question.
Whether he's still alive.
Indeed, many people believe that he passed away a few years ago and is being kept alive as a sort of an Albert Goldstein character, like in Orwell's book. They keep Goldstein as this sort of evil person for everybody to hate. Whether he really exists or not is almost irrelevant. And maybe that's what we're looking at now with bin Laden.
I think so.
But I think it's very important that this term conspiracy theorist is perhaps reclaimed. I've always been rather struck by how clever the Quakers were when George Fox founded the Religious Society of Friends, whenever it was, hundreds of years ago. The term Quaker was an insult. They were seen to be quaking in the sight of God, so
That's
people were laughing at them. And I mentioned this in the book. And therefore, by saying, all right, we'll call ourselves Quakers, so what? Suddenly, it took all the power out of that as an insult, and people went, oh. And I think conspiracy theorists should stand up and say, I am a conspiracy theorist. Do you have a problem with that? would you like to discuss conspiracy theories? And go for it, because I think this hiding from the term, it doesn't do anybody any good. So I think when it's thrown as an insult, you say, yes, by dictionary definition, I am a conspiracy theorist. Let's go from there. And again, I think if you do that with people, it sort of disarms them. Okay. Because it's a very, very lazy media way of dismissing anything it doesn't want to talk about by using this term. But I think we should be proud to say we are. That doesn't mean we believe any old thing that's going. It just means you're theorising and analysing, and you should be looking at evidence.
Because some of the theories, for instance, let's look at 9/11. There are some theories about 9/11 which seem more likely than others. For instance, that nanothermite was used to bring down the buildings, you know, 1, 2 and 7. But there are other theories that space-based energy weapons were used, or that the planes were holograms, that nothing actually hit the Twin Towers.
Well, I've always been of the view that we need to narrow down to the absolutely sort of identifiable evidence. I think as soon as you start speculating about hologram technology and all of this, what you're doing is almost defocusing the debate. Now, it's not to say that maybe this stuff couldn't be possibly true, but I think it's not necessary. What you can do is point to enough evidence in the discrepancies in the official record to be able to say the official story is not correct. We have clearly been lied to. They have clearly adapted and changed the record. Air traffic control, for instance. David Ray Griffin, in his book Debunking 9/11 Debunking, spends something like 80 pages just looking at how the air traffic control transcripts have been mucked about with, which show categorically that they did actually know these planes were in flight when they say that they didn't. Things like that are identifiable, provable bits of evidence, and I think that needs to be focused on. And I think, of course, as soon as you start talking about more outlandish things, that's used on the outside to discredit all of the serious evidence that there is against the official story, and I think that's a shame.
Could that be COINTELPRO, counterintelligence propaganda?
It could be, but equally I think there are people out there quite happy to speculate on wild and wacky things when there's nothing wrong with that. But I think you have to put that into a different category when there's so much serious evidence to be looked at.
So, I mean, there is low-hanging fruit, isn't there? There are things like nanothermite, and there are things like how does a 757 aeroplane fly into, completely disappear and be swallowed up by a 16-foot round hole?
Well, of course,
including the engines, which are themselves virtually, well, 12 foot or so across, and not in the centre. You know, they're suspended from the bottom of the wings, which are 120 foot across.
Absolutely. I mean, I appreciate in the world of conspiracy theory, you know, the Pentagon, the size of the hole is almost a cliche now, but on the outside, there are still people only realising now, actually, yes, how do you fit a 757 into a hole that small? That was one of the first things that attracted attention to, hang on a minute, this doesn't quite add up with what we're being told. So you've got that very visual evidence, but on the other hand, as you mentioned, just recently, a team of people, including Dr. Stephen Jones and others, have now analysed the powder left over from 9/11, the dust, and have found, as you mentioned, thermitic particles. Now, this is serious science that demands serious looking at. And yet, does that receive any mainstream coverage? No. What the mainstream will do is concentrate on the people that say it was all holograms or whatever. And that's the problem, is that they will always find an excuse not to engage in the serious scientific cases that are being put forward. And I think those in the truth community, if you wish to call it that, I think there is an onus on them to be as credible as possible when dealing with the mainstream. Without being disingenuous, they must be honest about their views, but you have to realise that on the outside, all of this is seen as shocking to question. All of it is seen as outlandish. But if you focus in on the key evidence, and this is what I tried to do in the book and in the lectures, you realise there is a very credible, serious case, and I find people will listen. And the amount of people that will then come up and say, yeah, actually, I've always felt uncomfortable about, you know, the whole thing. It's surprising. All
right, well, we're getting some text in now. I'm going to read out some text. All subjects that could possibly be in this book can be texted in tonight. We're going to have a good 2 hours, I hope. Carol says, I truly believe that Al-Qaeda is a fictitious enemy designed to take away all our rights. Want to respond to that?
It's interesting to note that even the BBC put out a very good 3-part series called The Power of Nightmares by Adam Curtis 3 or 4 years ago, maybe longer. which basically took apart the whole myth of Al-Qaeda, pointed out that Al-Qaeda was effectively created, in any case, by the Americans out of a bunch of disparate groups, which at the time the American administration needed them because the Russians were in Afghanistan or whatever, and it was almost created, and then as soon as they started to not serve the function, suddenly they were rebranded as terrorists.
And the word Al-Qaeda means the database, doesn't it?
I believe it does, and the other thing to say about Al-Qaeda is that it's now become a reality. So even if it wasn't a reality, now those groups that have been lumped in as this big, scary, shadowy organisation are acting up to that. They're playing up to the reputation that's been created for them. So it was almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. So Al-Qaeda, if it didn't exist, say, pre-9/11 in the way we're told, it certainly does exist now. But even then, I think it's not this kind of, you know, schmursh type sort of like organisation that's so organised. It still seems to be, from what we can see, a kind of a ragtag bunch of people doing what they can.
Every time an explosion goes off in any foreign city, it seems, and I listen out for these things, they always say a militant group called X, Y or Z, believed to be linked to Al-Qaeda, have you know, claimed responsibility or something, and yet it seems odd, doesn't it? They're all linked to Al-Qaeda.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, it would seem, yes, that they are all seen as one and the same thing. Whether they really are, I don't know. I mean, this is not to say, and I think this is important to stress, that we shouldn't be concerned about some of the Islamic fundamentalism that there clearly is. I mean, I'm not saying there's no issue with that, but to blame everything on this one organisation, Al-Qaeda, is, I think, to be very, very simplistic. And even because some people believe Al-Qaeda were involved with some criminal cabal within somewhere in America, that there was a combination. So, but, you know, whatever you believe, whether you believe Al-Qaeda was involved or not involved at all, there clearly are people acting up now to that name, and obviously we need to keep an eye on what's going on there. But this is where, as I say, it's become a sort of self-fulfilling problem that we now actually do have to deal with. Maybe that was the whole idea all along.
Well, here's one. I'm not aware of this at all. This is from somebody called Hesse in Kings Lynn, and he or she says, close-up of 9/11 757s show refuelling spouts. Need I say more? Have you heard of this refueling?
I'm not sure about refueling spouts. Some of the close shots of certainly the plane that hit the second tower seem to show these strange pods underneath, which some say are indicative of that they were actually military-adapted aircraft.
And that they had like some sort of missile in that was supposed to have fired.
Now, that has been questioned by some people who say it's a trick of the light. It's slightly contentious, but it is interesting that on the day there were, you know, many witnesses who said they didn't look like conventional craft.
It can't be a trick of the light simply because there are pictures taken from lots of different angles, and so if it was a reflection, you would only get it from one of those angles. But it is possible, and this is another theory that I've read, that it could be an electrical discharge from a plane moving fast through the air would create a static charge, possibly, which might have...
Well, what you're referring to there, yeah, is the flash that you see just before the planes enter. Yes, I mean, because some have used that to say that it's firing something into the building first to weaken the structure.
Soften it up a bit.
But you're quite right. Others have said that might be a natural effect that it would have. But things like that, I think, are interesting to discuss. But again, to me, that's not the most important thing of all. I think there's enough key evidence when you look at the physics of the way the buildings fell down and all of that, that says there's something very wrong with the official story.
OK, well, Vicky here says, I'm worried by the speed and connection of all these things, as if we are meant to see them and there is something else going on. Good question, Vicky.
I think there's always something else going on some level, and I think this is the problem. We can never know. I mean, maybe that one of the issues that the conspiracy community has is that sometimes it's easy to jump to conclusions and, you know, pull too much in together when, in fact, maybe it's not as coherent as that. But at the same time, neither does all this information, and neither is it entirely disparate. Somewhere in the middle, there do seem to be threads, which is, you know, what I'm trying to pull together for people, just so that they can go away and explore it more themselves. I mean, I would never sit here and say, oh, I've got all the answers. And I think we have to be very, very careful that we're not sloppy in giving that impression. But certainly there are questions to be raised.
Yeah, well, here's another one, a bit of an interesting idea. Mick in Preston says, if CO2 is a greenhouse gas, Are they going to ban fizzy drinks?
Well, maybe they'll work their way to that.
I can't see Coca-Cola standing by and letting that happen, can you?
Possibly not, no, but an interesting thought.
OK, what are your... Jerry in Northern Ireland says, what are your thoughts on the Shanksville plane crash on 9/11? Seems very suspect. That's Connor McGowan.
Well, this would be Flight 93, which, of course, was the plane which... in the
Let's roll plane.
The official story is that some of the passengers tried to regain control of the aeroplane, and in the tussle, the plane crashed into the woods. The problem with that is that there were several eyewitnesses who described an aerial explosion, and the debris field is spread across several miles, and the main area that is shown, which says this is where Flight 93 came down.
There was nothing there, was there?
There's nothing there. There's an anomalous patch of black with very minor debris that really couldn't have accommodated a plane of that size. So I think many people believe it was effectively shot down, or at least blown up in midair. Certainly we haven't been told the whole story about that. And indeed, again, many of the phone calls which were supposedly made from that flight, which initially it was said they were made by mobile phones, well, it was quickly pointed out that you wouldn't have got a mobile phone to work at that altitude.
Not in 2001.
Then, and in recent years, the story's altered. They're saying, oh, no, that they were backseat phones. But that doesn't tie in with the information that was originally released.
Well, none of those planes had those phones fitted.
Well, this is a contentious issue, but nonetheless, there's something clearly not right with the whole Flight 93 story as well. OK, Mark in Liverpool says, where is the plane debris at Shanksville and the Pentagon? And controlled explosions knocked the towers down. There is some debris visible in some of the photographs at the Pentagon, but not the level of debris you would expect from a 757. And there are some people that have analysed what you can see in the pictures.
That's Jack White, isn't it, I think?
There are several people. White is probably one of them, but Jack Black's an actor, isn't it? But anyway,
Jack White, then.
Some of the debris, if you match it like for like, looks suspiciously like what's called an A3 Sky Warrior, which is a fairly obscure American fighter plane. But either way, certainly the engines, or the bits that we are told are the engines inside the Pentagon, are far too small to be from a 757.
Right, well, there you go. That's pretty good evidence then, isn't it? That's like low-hanging fruit. If a 757 hits your building and then it isn't a 757, then the whole pack of cards. Indeed. Surely.
But I think the problem with 9/11 now is that when you look at how many people do doubt it and are asking for a reinvestigation, that really there's going to become a point where there's going to have to be some better explanation offered up by the authorities. Now, at what point do they attempt to do that, or do they just carry on denying? But I think, again, if you look at the polls that have been taken, it's something like, I think 60% of people, even in America, do not believe the official story of 9/11. I think that's very serious and needs addressing, because that's a serious undermining of the people running the world. Well, and sooner or later they're going to have to meet that.
Will in Belfast says Flight 93 landed in Ohio and was confirmed, but he also says it all points to 2012, so... perhaps we can elide.
Well, I mean, just
since this book links all these things together.
Did Flight 93 land? There were reports that the plane landed, yes, indeed, at Ohio Airport. That has been vigorously denied, I have to say, by the authorities, and indeed debunked. I mean, I don't know. There is one theory that all of the planes that we saw, the ones that hit the towers, and that basically were not the planes that were hijacked, or at least they landed the planes, put everybody that was on those planes onto one plane, Flight 93, which maybe then was dispatched somewhere over Shanksville.
Yeah, but maybe none of them were the original planes, perhaps.
Maybe not. But all of this is, of course, theorising. But the fact that we have to theorise tells you how much is wrong with the official story, which just really doesn't add up. And that's the problem, is that if those who support the official story get cross at conspiracy theorists trying to fill the vacuum, it's only because there are so many holes in the official story that people feel the need to do that, and that needs addressing.
Andy, I'm going to stop you there. We're going to go for a break. If you'd like to text in your questions or comments for Andy Thomas, please do so now to 87778 with the word EDGE, and then your text. See you very soon. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Andy Thomas. Just before the break, Andy, we were just about to start talking about 2012. So how do all these things that are happening, and they seem to be speeding up, I mean, do they link to 2012? Is it Is something going to happen? I mean, Hollywood is making movies, isn't it? Called 2012, out next month.
One of the things that I'm trying to do at the moment is to see where this does tie in with the prophecies and predictions for 2012. And some people don't see a connection between the War on Terror, 9/11, with 2012. They say, what's that got to do with it? One of the growing views is that what's going on is that 9/11 and all of this created an atmosphere of control, surveillance. It was used, certainly, to close down a lot of liberty and a lot of freedom.
Patriot Act and
all of that.
Patriot Act too.
And many people think that there is perhaps a reason behind that. Because if some of the prophecies about 2012, if the worst case scenarios were to come true, we could see something occur into the world, whether it be through some cosmic event, solar flare or whatever, that could overturn the natural order of things. Now, if that's true, and the conspiracy theorists are right that there is a ruling elite which is secretly pulling the strings, they are going to want to make sure that they remain in control if something were to upset the old order. And maybe this is why they feel they need to put into place a regime that holds us down so that if things do go topsy-turvy, they'll be all right and will be controllable.
Well, I read today somewhere, you need to put all your sheep in a pen when the big storm is coming.
Exactly right.
So, yes. Perhaps I read it in your book.
I think you probably did.
I think I probably did.
Yes.
So, do you think then that, let's just suppose for a moment that there are these people called Illuminati or people who will control us all.
I mean, yeah, I try not to use that word too much in the book. I refer to it, but I think it's become a buzzword, the Illuminati, again, which is, people imagine smoke-filled rooms of 6 people making it. I think it's a little less literal than that, but let's call them the ruling elite for the sake of an argument.
Well, let's say that there are these people that they have controlled us for centuries, if you like, and that they are party to some knowledge of the universe, some physical knowledge, you know, like the Earth goes around the sun and the sun goes round the edge of the Milky Way galaxy and so on, and every so often something big happens. Now, we do know, scientists tell us that, for instance, the poles do switch and that they have switched in the past. North Pole becomes the South Pole and so on, and that can have a big effect. Is it possible, do you think, that these people, if they do exist, are party to this knowledge and they know when it's going to happen or when something big is going to happen?
Well, I think what we need to say here for anybody who's new to this, the idea of the year 2012 being significant is that there is a cycle of time that's recorded by many ancient cultures around the world.
Including the Maya.
The Maya in particular, but not exclusively. The Maori in New Zealand have references to the cycle. The Chinese seem to encode it into the I Ching. So it's something which was obviously almost certainly based on an astronomical cycle. That cycle is 5,125 years, is the key cycle that the 2012 prophecies seem to tie into. And all of it seems to suggest there's going to be some kind of upheaval, transformation, massive change for the world whenever this comes around. Now, there are some scientific theories that have been put forward to account for this. Dr. Paul Laviolette, for instance, says that we're moving through what he calls a galactic superwave, that from the centre of the galaxy you get these pulses periodically coming out, and it may take thousands of years for us to go through them, but that we're going through one of these now. That will change the behaviour of the sun, cause more flares, coronal mass ejections, strange things to its cycle, and all of that's been true in the last few decades. It's been, you know, very active. Now it's gone very quiet in the current sunspot cycle. Some people think that this is a calm before a storm. Now, what is interesting here is, so there is science which is beginning to say there could well be cycles that are going to affect us. They're cosmological, they're there. But the ancients, in their own way, knew that whenever this cycle came around, something big always seemed to happen. Now, it doesn't mean that the elite, let's call them that for now, know any more than you or I exactly what's going to happen, but they clearly have great interest in ancient knowledge, esoteric knowledge, and the occult. And you only need to look at some of the secret societies that these people belong to, clearly, to see that they're very fascinated by that. So if these ancient people, with all these symbols and all this knowledge, encoded these prophecies in there, it stands to reason the elite are going to take them much more seriously and be far more aware of them than the average person on the street. So even if they are not truly sure what will then happen in 2012, if anything, they're going to want to cover themselves just in case something does. And I have a feeling that's partly what we're seeing now.
Well, one of the things you tackle in this book is prognosticators, you know, like the children at Fatima who were given secret messages about what's going to happen in the future, and people like Mother Shipton and who's that other famous one who wrote in quatrains?
Well, Nostradamus.
Nostradamus, that's the one.
I mean, Nostradamus, you can interpret Nostradamus in any way you really want because it's so kind of esoterically written, but there's many other prophecies and predictions that have come through from mediums, channelists, mystics, people like Edgar Cayce, and as you mentioned, in around the same time period, we had the apparitions of what appeared to be the Virgin Mary, whatever it was or wasn't, it appeared to be. Thousands of people witnessed this strange light flying around in the sky.
Well, this was, to them, they thought the sun
They
was
thought
dancing.
it was the sun. Now, clearly it wasn't the sun, or we would all have noticed.
And thousands of people all saw it
Thousands
together,
of people saw it.
didn't they?
There is even a photograph showing this object
Which
that
is
they saw.
in your book.
Which is also in the book.
And it looks like a UFO, doesn't it?
And the connotations with UFO activity are really quite strong. But what is interesting is something very clearly happened there. One of the people that spent almost a lifetime studying this was Cardinal Ratzinger, who is, of course, today Pope Benedict. So we have a man who influences millions of lives spiritually, who therefore must believe in the secrets of Fatima. And the first one was a prediction of the Second World War, then the rise of communism, the Cold War. Well, we know that this has all been and gone. The third secret was written off a few years ago as a prediction of the assassination attempt on John Paul II. But that doesn't sit with clues that the Vatican had hinted at. And one of the people that had dropped heavy hints that the third secret was about times of huge change.
End of time, I think.
About now, was indeed Cardinal Ratzinger, now the Pope. So many people believe that he treats those prophecies seriously that were given to the children, and that he's sitting on knowledge of, you know, imminent times. And maybe he will at some point come out and say more. But certainly it's very interesting when you see how the same information about change comes through from all these different ways. And of course, people who claim to have been abducted onto UFOs have also claimed they've been given visions by the beings they've met of future times which say something huge is about to occur, something big's going to overturn the old order in the world, and it's due any day now.
Well, Gordon says 2012 will be a time of great judgments. Prepare, prepare.
Yeah,
what can we do to prepare? We don't know
well, there's certainly the religious view that this ties in with the Day of Judgment, you know, and many people are waiting for, you know, the rapture and end time seen in a very biblical way. In a way, it is much the same as what the New Age has been saying, as though it's another interpretation of it. Now, I personally would be hesitant to interpret this too literally, and I do not necessarily believe everything's going to happen on 21st of December 2012, which is when the ancient time cycle switches over. Maybe it's going to be a more gradual shift than that. Maybe it'll be more subtle than we know. But on the other hand, if Hollywood's right, with a new 2012 movie, we're going to be looking at huge apocalypse all over the world. But let's hope not.
Well, I watched the trailers to that, or the one trailer and one promo ad or something, and it's pretty impressive stuff. It really is. I mean, there are people climbing up mountains, and even high mountains are engulfed by tsunamis.
By waves. I think the problem with this new movie is not that it's not a good movie. I'm sure it's very exciting. What it's doing is attaching to the 2012 phenomenon a lot of doom, a lot of negativity. And yet, one of the things we shouldn't forget here is that many of the prophecies, particularly the more modern ones, are saying at the other end of this period of transition, we will come out of it with a raised state of consciousness, that there is a positive side to it.
Well, is this the dawning of the age of Aquarius?
That's an astrological view on it, and the astrological view, 2012, in itself has something to say, that these are going to be turbulent times, even if you just look at the astrological side of it, without any knowledge of the ancient prophecies. But I do think we need to look at the positive side too, because it was all about transformation through these difficult times. And there is some evidence that, say, an electromagnetic pulse wave coming off the sun could actually increase the production of things like DMT inside our pineal glands and actually all give us a mass sort of leap of consciousness. Now, that's the other side of 2012 that's not spoken about, and many people think this will be a wonderful thing. But things like the movie, which is all about disaster, is making people associate it only with negative things, and I think that's a shame. And there are some conspiracy theories that say the film's designed to do that, to push us down, to stop us, you know, evolving to this next stage of evolution.
There have been lots of films like that. I mean, The Knowing, for instance.
Knowing was very much tapping into that same vein, and even went into, you know, ascension and a rapture-like experience at the end, very much
Yeah,
so.
a lot of the evangelical church, the Christian church, talking about rapture, aren't they?
Yes, yeah, very much. Which, of course, is not dissimilar to the ascension process that, of course, many of the New Age people have been talking about for many years. Now, whether this is an over-literal interpretation of something which is more about an inner spiritual shift, or whether we really are going to be lifted up if we are devout, remains to be seen.
So, looking at 2012 in a kind of simplistic way, on the downside, we're all going to die.
That's on the very downside, yeah.
On the upside, we could evolve into some better life form of some kind.
My take
Humanity plus.
Humanity plus, indeed. My take on it is this, and I mean, I explore this in the book because it was very important to me that people came out of reading the Truth Agenda uplifted. Because a lot of the problem with the conspiracy stuff is that it gets so doomy that you want to slash your wrists when you finish reading it.
A bit, can't
and
it?
that's not right, because to me what this time is all about is regardless of the prophecies, evolution of consciousness through experience, through self-awareness. This is already happening through enough people focusing on 2012. It's becoming a self-fulfilling shift, which I think is a very good thing and could serve us well.
But isn't it the case then that, let's assume for a moment again that there is this elite. If we're all going to die, it doesn't matter. If we're going to evolve in consciousness, aren't we going to suss them out straight away and go, ha-ha, it's you?
I think that may be one of the very things that they're worried about. And indeed, I think we're already in that process of identifying the things that are not right with the way the world is. And maybe that's why the suppression, the control, has to come in even more strongly than we've ever known now, because so many people are beginning to see the reality of what's going on. I think that is occurring.
Okay.
They don't trust what they're told anymore. They don't feel that the world that they're in is the world they thought that it was. And because of that process, they're beginning to think, hang on a minute, and they're waking up. And it's almost as if somebody's thinking, whoa, we don't want that, quickly. Give them more chemicals, suppress them, give them more distraction, whatever. We mustn't let them leap up.
Okay, here's a question for you then, and I know you dealt with it a little bit in this book, and I'm going to read out a question, and then I'm going to sort of expand on that. This is Aidan in Northern Ireland who says, there was a sighting of Our Lady in Knock, and it's on YouTube apparently, and this is a pilgrimage site, isn't it, in Knock in Ireland. I think it's in Southern Ireland, if I'm not mistaken. Do you think, and linking that with maybe crop circles, do you think that there are spiritual entities, aliens, beings who live in the ground or in space or in another space-time continuum parallel to ours or whatever, or angels, who are trying to tell us something? Do you think these manifestations of stuff are messages to kind of, you know, wake us up a bit?
I think it may be linked, because some people believe that there is basically a force of consciousness trying to make itself known by whatever means it needs to use to get through to different groups of people. So some people would not listen to the Virgin Mary, so maybe they need big secular symbols like crop circles to wake them up. Others need psychic channeling. They wouldn't be interested in a shape in the field. You know, and then you realise others would need experiences of aliens because they won't listen to this. It's coming through from so many other ways. So maybe the same consciousness will appear to others as a religious figure if that's what these people need. Or you could look at it another way and say that it is all essentially some huge transformative force which may as well be, say, the Virgin Mary, depending on how you interpret it, but speaking with essentially the same message. And this is what I find interesting. And another thing is that often where you get apparitions of the Virgin Mary, they're often well-known earth energy sites. When people, use dowsing and all of this, there are certain hot spots of natural energy in the ground.
Ley lines and...
Yes, and those have been very associated with apparition sites and UFO sites in some cases, and definitely crop circles. So again, you've got a natural energy, a natural sort of consciousness as well, which may be playing into this.
And they've been finding lots of pyramids recently, haven't they? They've just found another one in South America, which is bigger than the Pyramid of Giza.
Well, so they say, yes, that's right.
Pyramid.
So they say.
Vinny in Kent says, the wheels of 2012 are just picking up speed. The 9 gods are beginning to line up in space. Are you aware of the 9 gods?
No, I'm not sure what the ones he's referring to are. I mean, of course, in the Maya prophecy, in fact, there's very few actual Maya prophecies, as Jeff Stray, the 2012 researcher, has pointed out. That actually there's one monument in Mexico that refers directly to what would happen at the end of the cycle, and it talks of the return of the 9 support gods. Although very annoyingly, when it tries to tell us what they'll do when they're there, the last bit of it smashed off, so we can't tell. Most of where the rest of the prophecies come from are from what's called the Chilambalam, or the Jaguar priests, who didn't write down the Mayan sort of beliefs until around the 1500s, and it's much further on after the key Mayan times, but they tend to be the prophecies that are more apocalyptic, more in keeping with what people think the Maya prophecies are about. But in terms of carvings of direct references from the Maya at their height, it's really that one monument. And it does, as we've heard, talk about the 9 gods.
Isn't there a cross somewhere in the south of France, a famous...
The Hendaye Cross.
Hendaye Cross.
Which has various clues carved into it, which seem to refer to the 2012 time cycle.
And it's very cryptic, isn't it?
It's very cryptic. But, I mean, the cross itself doesn't go back as far as, say, the Maya, but it's... Nonetheless, there seem to be little clues in carvings and symbols all around the world referring to these times of change that we're now in today.
OK, well, talking about carvings, what do you think of the Georgia Guidestones? You mentioned them in your book. Yes. You want to tell people what they are? Yes,
for anybody that doesn't know, the Georgia Guidestones it's basically monuments. They're not unlike a sort of modern Stonehenge in a way in America, but they're carved with writings saying what the world should do.
In several languages.
In several languages to put itself to rights. Except for many people believe it's essentially a manifesto of the ruling elite. It's classic, New World Order talk. And one of the disturbing aspects is that it speaks of reducing the world's population very specifically.
Well, from 6 billion to 500 million, isn't it?
Whatever, it would be a huge drop if this policy was implemented. And, of course, many people think there is a depopulation programme either around the corner or already kicking off now. Now, that remains to be seen, but it's interesting that somebody spent the money to put these stones up. The person, I think it was a mysterious R.C. Christian, I think, put them up. But that was an obvious...
I know quite a few R.C. Christians.
Well, maybe. But that clearly was a pseudonym. But nonetheless, it seems to be laying down, well, this is what's going to happen, if the New World Order get their way. So some people think it's just a statement of intent that maybe we ought to take some notice of.
Well, there has been a lot of discussion, hasn't there, about these clues being put in plain sight because there's a need for them to kind of contract with us and say, well, we told you. Do you think that's valid?
It's definitely the case that some of the ancient symbols which are used by secret societies and those who have an interest in occult beliefs, and it would seem that the elite, let's call them that again, do have clearly a great interest in that. And therefore, when they build new pyramids, whether it be at the Louvre or on the top of Canary Wharf, or, there are pyramids and ancient symbols popping up everywhere, this is kind of dropping clues on one level just because they can, but also to let them, or let us know who's in charge. And I mean, the idea of a pyramid, beyond its more mystic connotations, is to say, hey, we're at the top, you're at the bottom, know your place.
All right, here's a good question. And by the way, I should mention, please keep your texts short, because if they're too long, they get cut off and I can't read them. Hessian Kings Lynn, who tells me that he is a male, in fact. Sorry about that, Hessie. He says, are other world beings sabotaging the Hadron Collider?
Oh, yes, the Collider.
Because I've read that there are people from the future.
Well, I mean,
sabotaging it.
I mean, one of the views is, of course, that this particle accelerator had it succeeded, it would create a black hole that could suck us all in and destroy the world. Now, the scientists say that's utter nonsense. Not being a scientist, I couldn't really comment. However, there are some who believe that beings from the future, worried about what this might do, have deliberately sabotaged it. But there is another view, which that in essence the experiment cancels itself out because it's accelerating particles so fast they're moving backwards in time and then wiping themselves out. So you can never actually have a successful experiment, which I think is a rather interesting idea, and given the money they've spent on it, a rather disappointing outcome. But yeah, who knows? Many people think there's a big conspiracy behind the collider.
It is an extraordinary thing to have built, isn't it? And then it doesn't work.
Well, especially when you think what the money could have been spent on. But that's another story.
Well, money's another story. Maybe we should talk about money. I mean, for instance, on the day before 9/11, I think it was Donald Rumsfeld announced that $2.3 trillion, that's trillion, had gone missing from the Pentagon, had just disappeared, and they didn't know where it had gone.
Yes, indeed, yes.
That was handy, wasn't it, just before 9/11?
It was handy, wasn't it? Well, there were lots of handy things about 9/11, like the vital documents connected to the Enron scandal being lost in Building 7, which fell down even though it had never been hit by an aeroplane. But that's, yes.
Yeah, that collapsed at free fall speed, didn't it, at 5:30?
Which it did, yes, mysteriously, due to, according to the official report, a new phenomenon where a few fires knock a whole building down. And the worrying thing about this is if that's the case, then they should have evacuated the whole of Manhattan the very next day, because...
They were all steel frame buildings, weren't they?
Indeed, and that's never happened. So I think, yeah, there is evidence that there are various things that get covered up and suddenly removed at key moments. But obviously the financial situation in the world and what's been going on with the economic recession, and that many people believe it's manipulated.
Should we talk about banks?
We can talk about banks.
Fiat currency?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I find is extraordinary is that we're living in a time where suddenly, you know, the banks were given the blame for this crash having occurred, and yet the governments of the world very clearly stood back and let them do whatever they wanted to do, and they're now saying, oh, we didn't see it coming, it was nothing to do with us. When clearly it was by default, because they should have been monitoring these people. And you have to conclude they stood back and allowed the situation that occurred to occur, which to me is tantamount to manipulating it. You know, whether they tried to make the crash occur or allowed it to happen, they should have seen it coming.
So if we're looking for this global elite, this Illuminati, is this a place to start looking in the banks?
It might well be. I mean, there have been various quite high-up people, ex-presidents and indeed, I believe, ex-bankers who have said, if you want to know where the real power lies, look at the world of banking. And basically, if they don't want something to happen, it won't happen. And we have things like the Federal Reserve in America, which many people, even mainstream non-conspiracy sources, have pointed out is utterly illegal if you actually look at it on a technical level.
Well, there was a Federal Reserve Act passed in 1913 in America, which gave them the right to exist and to create this currency, which
on one level
is basically just signed into being, isn't it?
Yes.
It's fiat. It's not backed with gold or silver or anything. No. It's just backed with, we promise to pay you another one of these if you bring one of these in.
And of course that's the problem I think we have in Britain at the moment especially, is that we have now borrowed so much money to get us through this little blip, gambling that that money will help us to recover again. If that gamble is wrong, Britain is effectively bankrupt, and then of course we'll be much weaker and we'll have to look to things like more links with Europe or whatever to get through the next few years. Well, some people think that's the very idea, is to weaken our sovereignty. Isn't
it the case that we are bankrupt? Not whether or not it succeeds.
I think we probably are, but nobody wants to say that at the moment because that's not very good for morale.
Okay, so in terms of morale, should we give some hope to people about...
I think we should. I mean, I am massively optimistic about the times that we're living in because everything that's coming up is stuff that needed dealing with a long time ago. Now it's coming up to be looked at. There's awareness, there's consciousness growing around the fact that the whole way the world works is not right. And we've needed to do this for a long time. So here's our opportunity now to find ways that we can deal with this in a really positive way.
Just by knowing about it, is that a start?
I think awareness is the first step, but proactive action and also, I believe, an active sort of refreshing of consciousness and our understanding of what consciousness is, as I explore in the book.
Andy, on the thought of that, we're going to go for another break. Once again, if you'd like to text in your questions or comments for Andy Thomas, please do so now. See you very much. Back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Andy Thomas. Andy, I'm going to read another text here, which is, again, a very sort of separate subject, but perhaps it ties in the way that you've tied things in your book here. And it's from somebody called Carol. She says, what about secret courts and children being taken from good families?
Well, there is a view that one of the strategies by which you control people is to destroy the cohesiveness of society. And there have been some people who've pointed out that some of the social policies that seem to be out there do precisely that. There's a guy called Brian Gerrish, for instance.
Well, he's been a guest on this show.
Who has said that, in his view, like, for instance, more children are being taken into care than should be, and he's very concerned for why that's happening and what's happening to these children. He thinks that, again, it's a way, in his view, to try to destroy the family. Now, I can't say that I've investigated that to any length, but I think there are certainly some things going on in society around us that you think it almost seems common sense not to do this. So why are we so overtly doing this, that, or the other in society? We do seem to encourage things which take away cohesiveness, and, you know, we're very much split up by so many things in society now, whether it be, you know, kids in one room watching the television, never eating with their mums, whatever it is, everything's about splitting us apart.
Okay. Here's one that kind of maybe does tie in with that again. This is Mark Jones in Wales. He says, do you think Obama will address the world shortly with regard to aliens and UFOs? If so, could this be part of an evil agenda? And then he's got cut off, so please keep your text short. So, you know, this is all part of the disruption thing. And a lot of people are saying it's about time there would be a revelation about UFOs. And other people have said that there's a big event planned for the 2012 Olympics. You know, a UFO will be hovering over the stadium in East London, for instance.
Well, there's been a lot of talk about disclosure of the knowledge of ETs from governments, particularly the Americans.
Yeah.
Now, the only thing I would caution there is I have been hearing that for nearly 20 years, but nonetheless, more and more people are saying, look, we're building up, there's going to be an announcement. The problem's going to be, if an announcement does suddenly come that, yes, we know about ETs and, yes, we're in contact with them, is that in itself going to be a reliable statement? Because Ian Crane, for instance, is in fear of a fake alien invasion or a fake alien presence being used to create a unification of a world government where we'll all be so in fear that we'll say, yes, we must unite, creating the very new world order, of course, that certain people want to put into place.
Ronald Reagan said, I often think that if we were faced a threat from outer space, we wouldn't have any wars on this planet.
Yes.
Effectively.
So, and Ian Crane pointed out that in some of the promotional videos for the 2012 Olympics, one of the bits that it shows is a great big flying saucer hovering over London. So one of his, I think, fears is that there may be some attempt to disrupt what's going on at the Olympics by perhaps using this kind of thing, aliens maybe, as a motif. Others, of course, fear some kind of contrived terror attack, and we obviously hope this isn't going to happen. Some people think that if enough people talk about it and there's enough awareness of how that could be misused, in that pivotal year, maybe it's less likely to happen. Well, but there is concern from some people.
OK. Well, Mark in Liverpool says reptilians will show themselves.
If anybody doesn't know what that refers to, of course, there is a view that the ruling elite is essentially governed by an extraterrestrial gene of these reptilian beings.
This is David Icke territory, isn't it?
David Icke has obviously been a big mouthpiece for that, that this bloodline has been passed on down through the years. And he believes it is essentially reptilian. And what is interesting is, although, I mean, I have no first-hand proof of that whatsoever, so I remain really in the middle on that, it is interesting, however, how many ancient cultures, and I write about this in the book, Sumerian, Egyptian, even the book of Genesis, chapter 6, refer clearly to a race of beings from the stars, often referred to as giants, interbreeding with mankind and giving birth to a hybrid race, which some interpretations of the Bible call the Nephilim.
Yeah.
And the Nephilim, it said, you know, go on to become very influential ever after in our history.
And Zechariah Sitchin has written a lot
and
of
Sitchin, of course, through his 12th Planet books and the Earth Chronicles, has been a big mouthpiece for that. Now, I know there's been a lot of criticism of Sitchin's interpretations of the Sumerian texts and that, but nonetheless, it is true that again and again the same story of interference from the stars in our bloodlines, it is there in the ancient knowledge, and it can't be denied.
And our genes,
it's possible.
And our genes are different from other apes on this planet, aren't they? We have a different number of chromosomes. Well, two of our chromosomes have been fused together, which might have been done. I mean, the theory is, isn't it, that that was done so that we could breed with an extraterrestrial creature.
Well, I mean, I think Sitchin believes that we, as mankind today, were created effectively as a slave race for these master beings. Some people believe are on the planet Nibiru, which is in a very long elliptical orbit, which may be on its way back into our solar system now. Some people think that's what 2012 is about. It's another possibility. But yeah, this idea that we were genetically engineered not to get too above ourselves, but something that what's going on now is we've reached a new stage of evolution where we're reconnecting with a higher consciousness. So whatever ruling beings don't want this to happen are trying to stop that occurring by cutting us off from our higher selves, again, through chemical suppression, social suppression, and everything else in the control agenda that we know about. All of this is theory, but it's something that I think should be considered, and I discuss at great length.
Let's talk about chemical suppression and fluoride and vaccines and artificial sweeteners that I can't name.
I see.
Brand names which Donald Rumsfeld has shares in.
There is no question that when you look at the appalling amount of chemicals that we are pouring into our bodies, and particularly children's systems, this is not going to have a good effect long term. Nearly all the tests on stuff like this have shown that it is detrimental, and yet somehow it still seems to be allowed. And yet, we're now looking at the Codex Alimentarius food safety body trying to shut down the availability of high-dose vitamins, natural health supplements, whilst at the same time letting in more GM, more pesticides allowed in. You know, if this goes through, as it could in the next 2 or 3 years, we're not going to have even the option of a healthier way of living, because one of the Codex Alimentarius proposals is that if you were to claim that, say, garlic or mint, if you were to claim that it had a medicinal property, that would instantly then be classified as a drug and would have to go through medicinal trials. So when we...
And no one's going to pay for that, of course, because they can't own it.
No, so the only companies that will be able to do that are the big pharmaceutical companies, which, of course, already control our lives so much today. So, you know, when we're entering the realms where some of these deadly artificial sweeteners are being allowed and fluorides being allowed, but garlic and mint are being classified as drugs, you know, we're in a crazy world. And this needs addressing.
I was reading the other day about hydrogenated fats, which are apparently unhealthy. In America, manufacturers can legally put on the label of their products, biscuits or whatever it is, cakes, cereals, trans fat-free if it contains less than a certain amount per serving. So they just say the recommended serving is tiny and very small, which gets them below the limit, and then they can say it's trans fat-free, even though it's packed full of trans fats.
Indeed.
So, and if it's GMO, if it's genetically modified organisms in there, they don't have to say.
So you have that going on, but then, of course, you have, like, millions of people around the world now guzzling things like Tamiflu, that even mainstream sources acknowledge it has side effects people should be aware of. And then, of course, we have at the far end of the conspiracy spectrum the belief that the swine flu vaccines are essentially yet another attempt to introduce more pollutants into the human system rather than being there to save us. Now, I'm not a doctor. I can't say whether that's true or not, but a lot of people believe it and have concerns about that.
Well, we've done programs about it on this channel, so. Okay. Denise in Cambridgeshire says, are the powers that be scared that we will stop taking the Prozac and wake up?
I think there's a great truth to that. I think the last thing that they want is for us to be healthy and self-empowered. And I think all the time that we're dosed up to here with all sorts of chemicals, and it's in everything that we eat, never mind the air, of course, that's another story. Yeah, I think they would hate us to stop taking Prozac and love us to be on Ritalin and all of this kind of thing, because then I think we're rather more controllable and rather less stepping into our own power.
Okay, well, we should talk about chemtrails, but before we do, I'm going to ask you this question. This is from Chris in Milton Keynes. He says, please, can you discuss monatomic gold?
Well, monatomic gold was something that was very much all the rage in the sort of New Age realms about 5 or 6 years ago. White powder gold, this is also described as. And it's something which, according to people like Lawrence Gardner, the ancients used to imbibe this stuff, and it would give them, you know, properties of great health, or even immortality.
Isn't it connected to levitation or something?
It apparently has all sorts of extraordinary properties. I mean, the only thing is there are some people today who are saying that they can now manufacture monatomic gold and they're taking it, and yet I haven't yet seen anybody who's been immortal recently.
Well, you wouldn't know what you're like. If they're still alive, that would be enough.
Let's just say that, you know, I haven't seen any overt effects. So whether the stuff that's currently being peddled as white powder gold is the same as what the ancients apparently once took, I can't say. But yes, I mean, there has been a lot of writing about this, that back in ancient times there was a great awareness, and this wouldn't have been available to any Tom, Dick and Harry. This would have been stuff that would have been available to, again, the upper ruling classes.
Okay, well, let's talk about chemtrails then, because, you know, we did touch upon that. A lot of people think that government agents of some kind or another are crossing our skies at high altitude, leaving trails of chemicals of some kind. Do you think this is the case?
I think you have to be careful with the chemtrails phenomenon, because I accept there have been some anomalous trails in the sky. The problem we can get to is a state of paranoia where perfectly normal vapour trails from aeroplanes are automatically assumed to be chemtrails. Now, it is true that aeroplanes fly much higher now than they did 10, 12 years ago, and do cause more vapour trails than they would have done in years past, so you're going to see more. That said, there have been tales of, you know, very peculiar trails and very clear evidence of planes crisscrossing the skies as if they're doing something. Now, there are some that believe that if the powers that be are worried that there is going to be a big solar flare or some climatic event which is going to change the world, that they're trying to seed something into the atmosphere which is going to either protect the atmosphere or change it in some way that suits their purposes. I think the problem we have is that there is so little real science to do with chemtrails. It really is in the realm of conspiracy theory. It needs looking at. I think it's very hard to reach a conclusion as to what's going on there, but we should monitor it.
Andy in Leicester says, re chemtrails, will the elite also be breathing this stuff in? I mean, that's a good question.
Presumably they will. Well, unless they're planning, of course, on retreat into their underground bunkers with their oxygen masks or whatever.
Well, I'm wondering, could it be, let's just hypothesise here for a moment, what if the global warming agenda is a myth and actually the world is getting colder? So what they're doing is they're using chemtrails to make the world warmer so they can back it all up. So then they can, hold on just one second, and the other theory about that is that then they can start charging everybody carbon taxes and control us and tax us in another way.
Well, I mean, you may remember that back in the 1970s, global cooling, the new ice age, that was what everybody was talking about. It's only in the sort of decades since that it suddenly turned to global warming. And, yeah, global warming is certainly something we need to be concerned about, but it is being used to create fear. It is being used to justify controls and financial taxes and all of this kind of thing in a way that even if you believe global warming is real, the way it's being used is really not healthy. But I do think that's an interesting idea that maybe, the truth is we're looking at global cooling, so they've tried to distract us with global warming so that we don't see the real threat, and that, maybe the chemtrails, as you say, are trying to protect us in such a way as to warm us up. But maybe that's being too hopeful. Some would say, that's giving you the impression they're here to look after us when they're not. But I think it is an important point that until they go into their underground bunkers, presumably they're breathing the same air. So I don't quite see how it would benefit the elite to poison everything, unless, of course, they are reptilian lizards and don't need the air that we do.
Okay, all right. So, look, this the truth agenda is, as we've discussed, a sort of condensation of thousands of theories, isn't it? I mean, where does it all kind of lead us, do you think? Where's the point at which it becomes that you put these things together and make the hardest sense?
I think, I mean, it's where we're coming to now. I'm trying in the Truth Agenda to discuss all of the stuff that we're talking about here, seeing where it leads people. Now, I believe that you can never truly know what the answer to a lot of this is, but you can make a reasonable set of assumptions when there's enough evidence. But one of the points that I make in the book is that even if you throw all of the conspiracy theory away, and it turns out that that's all wrong, you've still got clearly a control agenda. You still clearly have a political agenda being put into place by people that want power, even if it's just for power's sake and nothing to do with 2012. You're dealing with the same thing at the end of the day. And the solution is the same. Because even if there is no big change coming in 2012 and there's no conspiracy, people are not happy. The human race is clearly on not a very good spiritual trajectory. We need to turn that round. And either way, that evolution of consciousness, in my belief, and the belief of many, has got to be the step forward that is going to take us into the next stage of history. Because we can't carry on like we are. And say, even on the most basic level, everybody knows in their heart of hearts that we need a transformation. So I suppose what I say is, if all of the conspiracy theories that are being discussed, if all it does is galvanize people to care, to make them think more deeply than they have done up to now about what's going on in their world, even if they don't necessarily reach the right conclusions, it's been worth it. It's a hypothesis, therefore, that needs discussion, needs investigation, even if not all of it turns out to be true. I suspect the ultimate truth of the global agenda is going to be somewhere in the middle, between the two extremes of no conspiracy, all conspiracy. The truth is somewhere here. And I think we need to be very, very careful that we stay sensible, very open-minded, and always look for evidence. But at the end of the day, look at what is there. And what is there clearly doesn't seem to have our best interests at heart collectively, but does serve the needs of the few. And I think we need to rebalance that.
Well, yeah, let's look at the people who lead us then. Let's look at Tony Blair. You know, somebody texted in earlier, it's scrolled off the screen now. You know, what do you think about him likely to become President of Europe, effectively?
To try to bring it down to the real world, there's a chapter in Truth Agenda that just looks at, OK, you're not sure about all the conspiracy stuff, but look at this, and analyses the weapons of mass destruction scandal, frankly, in the lead up to the Iraq war. Because I find it astonishing how few people seem to really remember that. You know, life moves on and we tend to forget, and the fact is that just emails this year released from Whitehall made it very clear that the government knew very well there were not weapons of mass destruction before they went into Iraq. Everybody collectively felt it in their hearts. That's why millions took to the streets around the world, you know, maybe 2 million in London alone, a lot of people, whatever the numbers were, because they knew there was something at the core of it wrong. Now, the person that was at the head of that government at that time was Tony Blair. And many people feel with the Dr. David Kelly affair, and it seems almost certain, if you look at Norman Baker MP's investigations, that Kelly was murdered.
Should just say that you're speaking at AV3 next month,
and so is Norman
Baker.
Baker.
Norman Baker.
Yes, he is. And the Dr. David Kelly affair, I think, is a crucial chink here, because Kelly was a very respected UN weapons inspector until the week he spoke to the BBC to say there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then a week later, the very same government that had him as one of their right-hand men was describing him as a, quote, Walter Mitty-like fantasist, end quote. Now, well, one view's wrong and one's right. I think when you look at how that was handled, it was a disgrace. Millions, perhaps, of people have been injured or died or had their lives ruined by what happened in Iraq. And the bottom line is the person pulling the strings ostensibly, visibly, was Tony Blair.
Well, it wasn't just him, was it?
It wasn't
George
just him,
W.
Mr.
Bush.
Brown as well, of course, Mr. Bush. Should these same people be rewarded? by positions that give them even more power over even more people. And I think many people feel profoundly uncomfortable at Tony Blair suddenly being given the presidency of the EU when there are such vast questions to be answered to do with what's happened in previous years. And I don't think that that's going to sit comfortably if that is what occurs.
Well, again, I mean, if you look at this elite agenda, it seems like maybe that is in place if the will of the people is so clearly being ignored. If so many people marched, for instance, against a war, and they were the ones who could be bothered.
I believe one of the ways forward out of the issues that we're dealing with here is focused, collective intent, because experiments with the power of consciousness, the power of the mind, and things like the Global Consciousness Project, where people have found out that the more people focus their thoughts with great intent on even a set of computers, they can now make them react. There's a lot of very important work going on with that. Suggests that the power of intention is what carries what occurs in the world.
Do you think that's why we have occasionally these velvet revolutions when despots are overthrown?
Yes, because
almost
suddenly,
magically,
exactly,
and the Berlin
suddenly
Wall
there's a
comes
focusing
down
of intent and people are galvanised. The problem is maintaining that. Now, the powers that be, the people that want power, are always, by their very nature, very focused. Very, very focused indeed. And yet, we are so distracted with TV, materialism, nice comfy sofas and that we can't quite be bothered to do anything. That's why we all voted, collectively speaking, Tony Blair back into power after the Iraq War. Despite everything that had gone on and all the feelings about it, Bush voted back in after the Iraq War, for instance, because we haven't quite got the focused intent to do something about it. And that's where we're overridden by those who are very clear with what they want. That is what has to change. That's what now needs to happen in society and around the world, is to match that intent with our intent for positive change. And I believe that could really make a huge difference. But it's going to take everybody to say, all right, I'm going to do my bit to make a difference. I'm going to stand out of the crowd and take the risk to do that.
OK, I'll get back to that in a second. I just want to read out one text. Somebody says here, I've got pics of possible chemtrails. Can I email you? There's a thread on our website. If you go to the forum on the edgemediatv.com website, there's a thread about chemtrails, a very, very big thread, actually. Lots of people have already posted their pictures there, so please go there and join our forum and leave your comments. OK, let's just get back to where we were. If this elite has a stronger intent than the rest of the people, they manifest this intent in certain ways, don't they? And I've got a question here from Shelley in Hull, who says, what do you think about the Bilderberg group? And there are lots of other groups, aren't there, that are supposed to be the place where they repose, if you like Council of Foreign Relations and Tavistock Institute and lots of other organisations like that. Trilateral Commission.
Yeah, exactly right. It's very clear when you look at these high-level meetings that go on behind closed doors all around the world, and you look at the top-notch people that are going there, that big decisions are being made behind closed doors and outside of the eyes of democracy. And it seems that what they decide at these meetings is then what gets filtered down to our parliaments with our sort of facade of democracy. I do think this is something that needs addressing. These people are influencing our lives. Why shouldn't we have some access to know what is going on there?
But isn't it the case that, you know, if it is about intent, then their intent, in a sense, is a lot simpler, isn't it, than ours, if you like, than everybody else's? Because everybody's worried about, you know, their family or their job or money or paying the mortgage or whatever it is. Yes. Whereas it seems that if you think about this logically, these people who are, if they exist, in control in this way, have a very simple agenda. It's they stay in power, they have all of everything, and the rest of the people don't and do what they say.
I think that's absolutely right. And I also think that, of course, we are distracted by things like debt. I mean, like, you're in debt as soon as you're a student now. So you're spending all your time just trying to live, never mind protesting. Students, for instance, don't have the time to protest, never mind anything else like they used to, because they're having to go out there and work behind bars and make money just to exist. So from day one, we're kind of distracted with that, and then everything else, you know, and materialism, we're taught that we need certain things. We've got to have this, we've got to have that. So we spend all our time trying to get that and not dealing with the things that we could be. Whereas you say, the flip side of that is it's very simple if you're just trying to stay at the top.
And it seems like nowadays we're born with the sort of Damocles hanging over our head by a thread.
Well, not only financially, but fear too. We have the fear of terrorism dangled. We have the fear of global warming. We have health and safety, political correctness. It's all sort of designed to keep us down and make us fear sticking our heads above the parapet. And that's the problem. We've been taught that you don't do that because you'll be shot down.
Andy, we're going to go for another break now. Once again, if you'd like to text in your questions or comments to Andy Thomas, please do so now. Just text 87778 with the word EDGE, and then your text. See you back here very soon. Welcome back to On the Edge with me, Theo Chalmers, and my special guest, Andy Thomas. Andy, there was a question on the screen that scrolled off now about Bohemian Grove, and I think we'd like to talk about that, wouldn't we?
Bohemian Grove. Well, for anybody that doesn't know, in the late 19th century, there was a secret society formed in California. And they called themselves the Bohemian Club, and they bought some woods, and once a year they would perform this ritual called the cremation of care, where they would effectively sacrifice the effigy of a child to a giant stone owl, which seems like some quaint bit of Victoriana, but it still goes on today. And when you look at the roll call of people that go to Bohemian Grove, your Nixons, your Kissingers, allegedly your Bushes and your Blairs and your Cheneys, this seems to be quite a strange thing for our world leaders to be doing on their holidays. And the fact that it's not spoken about, it's not denied, but it's just not discussed, is seen by many people as rather sinister.
Well, Bilderberg as well is not discussed, is it? The people who go to Bilderberg meetings.
Indeed.
But what goes on? I mean, do you think this is the sort of summit of the global elite? This is where they all get together and go, right, this is what we're going to do next?
Well, I mean, if you look at the film, which has been secretly taken, I mean, there's Alex Jones broke in with John Ronson, and they filmed, and other people, I believe, have as well. I mean, it almost looks like a ridiculous kind of pageant. You know, you've got a voiceover that's all very big and dramatic. And it's almost laughable, but not quite, because it's just, if they just said, hey, yeah, look, once a year we all get together, we have a funny time, and that's all there is to it, you could sort of relax. But then when you hear that things like, apparently the Manhattan Project, the first meeting to discuss that, apparently...
Which is the building of the atomic weapon.
Building of the atomic bomb, apparently took place at Bohemian Grove. You think, well, what other decisions get made around the campfires? I mean, it's very bawdy, there's a lot of saucy jokes go on there, and it's all male, of course. But nonetheless, the fact that this is going on every year, and if the person on the street knew their world leaders every now and then would sit beneath a giant stone owl sacrificing effigies of children, they might not feel the same way about them afterwards.
It is a bit spooky, isn't it? And, I mean, there's also Skull and Bones, which several presidents, both Bushes and you know, presidential candidates like Kerry...
Yeah, John Kerry, yes, at Yale University, of course.
Were members of the secret society that they couldn't discuss.
I mean, secret societies plainly are very influential in our society, and obviously you have Freemasonry and things like this. I think a lot of people in Freemasonry wouldn't remotely consider it conspiratorial, but maybe up in the top levels, and then some of the deeper secret societies, I think it does clearly help them pull strings that wouldn't be able to be pulled without those connections. I think what some people are concerned about is how much actual occult knowledge do they really use? Is it just an affectation? Is it something that's genuinely used for power? And of course, unless you join up, you won't ever know for sure. But there are people that have looked into this and believe there's more to it than meets the eye.
Yes, I haven't been invited to join the Illuminati.
I wonder why. Let's see.
Have you?
Of course. No.
No, I thought not somehow. Okay. TV Mad Max in Derby says, I can't believe everyone's accepting the new X-ray machines that can see you naked at Heathrow Airport. Are we all suspects now?
It's a bit kinky, isn't it? I mean, I think the thing with the airport X-rays is it's the ultimate expression of the surveillance society. I mean, this is now like the old 1950s things where they would design the glasses that could see through clothes. It's the ultimate intrusion of our lives. And, yeah, I think just on a basic level, you think, well, some security guard might be some dirty old man just enjoying looking at people's bodies. But, you know, on a deeper level, it's the ultimate intrusive surveillance, and it's just a sign of where we're going. Yeah, hey, of course, we've got to have some protection against terror weapons or whatever, but this does seem to go one step too far.
Yes. OK, Guy in Cumbrawn says, Denver airport murals. That's a good one, Guy.
I've heard of this, but I have to say, I don't actually know what the murals are. I've heard there is something apparently rather...
I think they're a bit like a kind of pictorial representation of the Georgia Guidestones.
Right, right.
But, so they are, you can see them online, so...
Okay, well, I will investigate.
Okay, we won't mention that. Peak oil or no peak oil? Who is right, Alex Jones or Mike C. Rupert?
Well, I mean, the peak oil thing really, to some degrees, goes with the global warming thing. It's that the concern people very rightly have for the planet is being misused, it is believed, to create, again, agendas of control and power. And by saying to everybody we're about to run out of oil, and we therefore need to curtail the way we live our lives, is used to justify all sorts of things. In time, it's going to be restriction on travel, restrictions on our lifestyles, leaving only sort of the upper classes with access to stuff that today we all take for granted. If you follow the ultimate trajectory of where we're going, I mean, I think Lord Turner last year said flights should be rationed, for instance. Things like this, it's almost like, again, this pushing us down. Because we are concerned for the planet, we go along with this. And it's very emotive. But there are people, like Ian Crane is another one who worked in the oil industry, and I have spoken myself to people I've spoken to at businessmen's lunches that I've spoken at as a lecturer, and I've said to them, you know, is oil running out? And the belief is, yes, ultimately it probably will, but we're nowhere near the level of peak oil that some people are screaming about now. So perhaps it is that it is being exaggerated for effect, again, to create this mandate to give us another reason why we have to give away our freedoms.
But perhaps it's not about, you know, peak oil or not peak oil. Perhaps it is actually more about, well, okay, you know, perhaps it's not a finite resource. There are people who believe it's made by bacteria deep underground, and they'll continue to make it. But yes, perhaps the control element of saying you shouldn't be burning it because you're destroying the environment means that we can tax you and tax you and tax you and make you use less and less of it, and perhaps control, like you say, who flies, who doesn't fly, who has a car or use of a vehicle. And who doesn't, and so on.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, nobody wants the environment to be polluted. If we could find a replacement for oil, fantastic. And there are various claims for, you know, free energy devices, clean energy. There is, of course, a view that that's being suppressed, and because the economy is so governed by oil, and, you know, all the wars that have been fought and are being fought, and wanting to put pipelines in place, that's there because it keeps certain people in control. If we all suddenly had our pocket-free energy device, that, of course, would end. So again, that's another reason to sort of keep oil in the picture, even if they seem to be trying to restrict its use. But at the moment, the technology, the kind of thing that you read about in Nexus magazine, or people like Stephen Greer are claiming exists, certainly we're not hearing very much about that. And I suspect that's going to be, again, a big leap forward when the lid's taken off that.
Well, if we're talking about the control agenda, could it not be that... well, I've read a couple of times recently a link being made between global warming and the population on this planet. And suddenly it seems the link is being made that too many people are the cause of global warming, which would bring into play, you know, the agenda of, say, as written on the Georgia Guidestones.
Well, there was a conference held in 1975 by essentially a group of people that believed depopulation was the only way forward. You can trace a lot of the global warming scare that we know today back to that conference of 1975. And there is a belief of some that, yeah, what global warming is being used is to not only use it as an excuse that we should control the population, but also we should keep the developing world down to keep the Western powers up where they are, because we've been supported by the developing world for a long time. The last thing you want is for that to turn around the other way. So we have to stop them having access to all the technologies that put the West up on the top and made it powerful and rich. So again, there's another reason to promote global warming as something which we need to deal with immediately.
So that what, you mean it's against the third world, or is it against the population of the first world?
Well, many would say that the depopulation program, believed in by some people, is beginning with the third world, or the developing world, as I believe we should call it today. Yes, and that's where they would ideally like to start, but then where does it stop? If there is any truth to that, and that there is a plan afoot to wipe us all out, then obviously there comes a point where we have to consider how paranoid do we need to be. Do we try and stop it? Do we just live our lives as positively as we can? There comes a point where I think unless you see clear evidence for this occurring, I think you have to try and live with the highest hopes for mankind, because I do know people that worry that there is a depopulation program in place.
And it's linked to vaccines, for instance.
Linked to vaccines, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, but you can live with this weight on your shoulder. You have to throw that off, hope for the best, and do what you can to spread awareness so it doesn't occur.
So there's real awareness to be spread, and there's kind of fear to be put to one side.
Yeah, fear is the key. All the time that we're living in fear, actually we're giving in to perhaps the agendas that any ruling elite is trying to put in place. And the conspiracy world needs to be very careful that it offers hope and solutions and not just the fear. Otherwise, that's creating the very problem. And again, in the truth agenda, that's why the whole last section of the book is devoted to giving solutions and some inspiration to deal with this, because I believe there are solutions, and I believe that we do need to be optimistic and step out of that fear, because that's the solution. Going into more fear, thinking somebody's about to wipe us out any day, it just disempowers us, and I don't think that's the way forward.
Well, I'm really enjoying the fact that we've been able to talk about so many different subjects, and here is a real one out of left field. We've actually done the show on this once, cattle mutilation.
Cattle mutilation. Well, this really comes back to the UFO phenomenon, because there's so many unexplained mysteries in the world. You've got nice mysteries like crop circles and, to a degree, ghosts and out-of-body experiences and all of this. But then you've got things that are mysteries, maybe because nobody wants to really seriously face it. And you have carcasses of animals, very often cattle, not exclusively, but often. All kinds of animals, found thousands, I believe, of cases over the years, often in America. And they've had
here as well.
Bits spliced, over here too as well, I believe. Bits have been spliced out of them almost with laser precision. There's no blood, there's no mess, there's no evidence of a struggle. And, of course, the key thing is sightings of strange lights are often made when these bodies are then found. So some say it's secret military projects trying to use their genetic material for some reason. Why they couldn't just buy their own cattle, I don't know. Or others think it's extraterrestrial.
But if you were stealing cattle to take their reproductive organs or their tongues or weird bits and make weird holes in them and things, why would you bother taking the corpse back and leaving it there? Sometimes in trees they've been found, you know, cattle have been found in trees. Yes, this is the mystery.
Why not just take the whole thing and not cause a fuss?
You know, turn the rest of it into hamburger.
Indeed. But this is part of the mystery, and it's certainly something going on that most people don't get to hear about that, partly because they don't want to hear about it. But
if we accept that there is this cattle mutilation, then, and it is as weird as it seems to be, then we have to think, well, it's not people, it's not humans doing this, then who could it be?
Well, I mean, there is the skeptic view that all of it is just things like blowfly maggots and that just causing sort of bits of the body to be decayed without any obvious... But it really doesn't sit with the sightings, particularly of the lights and all of this, and I think that...
The fact that it happens in a very short time scale. It happens overnight, usually, or
apparently so,
a few hours.
Yes, indeed. So if you own cattle, you might like to... get some security cameras. There we are. There's a cause for surveillance.
If we accept that it's happening, then we've got to think, well, you know, maybe there is on this planet a secret population of other beings of which we're not aware. Now, they don't have to be aliens. They could be troglodytes that live in a hole in the ground, but...
the extraterrestrial connection, obviously, is important because many people think UFOs are here. There are beings from other worlds interacting already with our governments. Up to good or no good is still open to question, and that all of this does tie in with the belief that the ancients made contact with extraterrestrials and that they came down to Earth eons ago and that they're still visiting now. And I mean, this is where you get to the view also that if you look at the ancient text as to where the race of beings from the stars first came down, it was in the area best known today as Iraq. Funnily enough.
Oh, Babylon.
Or Babylon. And this is where some people think we are waiting for the return of the gods. Those who believe in Nibiru believe that the race who originally seeded us as a slave race are coming back, and that what is going on now is to try to take power back in the very place where they originally supposedly visited. And is it coincidence and it might be, but is it that when the Americans went into Iraq, they put Camp Alpha, their main military base, directly on the spot of ancient Babylon?
Well, I had a text a little while ago from somebody called Aaron who said that there was a Stargate that Saddam Hussein controlled in Babylon, in the ancient city of Babylon.
Well, I mean, it's a theory that there are portals where these beings come in, and that basically, yes, this was something he had access to that the rest of the world didn't want him to be controlling. I mean, you know, we're going to the true fringes here, but nonetheless, it is interesting that symbolically, modern Iraq, where that is considered a site of great ancient power, and our need to control that may have more to it than meets the eye.
Well, it's very odd, isn't it? There you are, you've invaded a country for very suspect motivations, and then you put a camp that you call Camp Alpha, like it's your most important one, smack bang on an extremely ancient archaeological site.
Destroying many of the ruins, by the way, in the process. There was a lot of protests from archaeologists.
Why would you do that unless there was some other significance?
Yeah, well, why indeed? We've never had a sensible answer for that.
And actually, this, quickly, while I remember it again, that thing about the big owl, the giant owl in Bohemian Grove,
yes,
they've also got the street plan of Washington, D.C., makes the shape of a giant owl. And there are other buildings in places like, I think, Austin, Texas, shaped like a giant owl. So there's this symbolism thing going on, isn't there?
Well, and I mean, the layout of various cities, you know, embodies, it's well-known, secret society symbolism. London, Paris in particular, various places in America. So it's almost as if they've been laid out as temples, if you actually look at them from afar. People like Robert Bauval have written about this kind of stuff. So, there's more to everything.
Dan Brown as well.
And, of course, Dan Brown. Well, Dan Brown, I mean, he takes a lot of stick, but what he's doing is popularising ideas which are in the collective, and to some degrees he does, even if he's using them in fictional terms, he does alert people to the idea that maybe there's more to the story on all of the stuff that he touches on, and as such his books provide a kind of service. But I mean, you should never take them literally, but
yeah, maybe they're like on our way in for a lot of people, you know,
yes,
into
definitely
these kind of subjects.
Yes, they are, and maybe that's the function that they serve, you know, however good or bad you think they are as writing. Nonetheless, yeah, they've got people interested in a lot of the realms that we're talking about today.
Okay, so, Denise in Cambridgeshire says, are the silent black flying triangles alien or man-made?
Well, that's where it comes down to whether you think a lot of the UFOs that are seen are secret military technology, may be derived from reversed engineered, captured ET technology,
Roswell or whatever.
Roswell, etc., or are they the ETs, or a mixture of both? It's pretty clear. I mean, when you look at stealth technology, I mean, you know, some of the stealth bombers do look suspiciously like black triangles. Are the black triangle UFOs the next generation of those that haven't yet been revealed to us, or are they from somewhere further away? But this is the big puzzle. But one thing is clear, they are there. And when some people say to me, as they will at talks, do you believe in UFOs? You say, well, they're there. So many people see them, ex-military
But what do you mean by UFO? Because all it means is unidentified,
flying object.
It could be a hot air balloon.
But in terms of objects which clearly don't have a mundane explanation, there's something flying around in our airspace, and we need to accept that, whatever they may be.
And do you think the people who are in these things are mutilating cattle, perhaps?
Well, who knows? I wouldn't like to meet the people that are. It seems an odd thing to be doing, but there we are.
OK. Well, look, we've got 6 minutes or so left. And I think really we need to kind of pull all this together somehow. It's been fascinating going, you know, from Roswell to Roslyn and so on. I mean, we've covered a lot of ground here. A lot of it must be confusing for people.
Yes.
But what can we take from it? You know, what is the conclusion of this book, if you like?
Well, I think that what people are hearing at the moment is a lot of confusion. They're hearing interest in all sorts of things. They're hearing people question 9/11, the moon landings, which is also
We didn't even talk about
the moon landing.
But
But it doesn't matter. The fact that they're questioning these things, and then they look at things like the weapons of mass destruction issue, which was very real world, and if you look at it squarely in the eye, is an utter disgrace. You then begin to put the pieces together, but people are struggling because there are so many sources of good and important information out there, but it's hard to get it all into one shape. So what I've tried to do is, without being disingenuous or trying to warp it into what I want it to be, just shape it, pull the threads together enough to say there is a debate that needs to be had here about this, this and this, and they appear to be related. But most of all, as I said earlier on, to say that even if you don't agree with some of the more extreme fringe views, they often ask questions that are good questions, valid questions that need answers. And even if you dispense with all the conspiracy theories, there's still something left in the middle that says there's something not right with the way the world is being run. There's something not right with where the human spirit collectively has gone. And this needs to be turned around. And I truly believe that the psychic experiments that are going on now, the power of the mind, kind of stuff that Dean Radin has been examining, that Lynn McTaggart's written about, that if we could learn to tap that force of consciousness and shape our thoughts and live our lives differently so the collective then adjusts, we're going to see a massive change. Because if there are ruling elites, if there are people out there doing things we don't like, we need to remember that they are a reflection of us. They are a projection of what's going on in the collective inside all of us. And I'm aware that I have my own issues that are in some way reflective of what's going out there. Other people I know do. And we need to own what's going on, because the problem with conspiracy theory is that we often finger point, it's them over there doing it to us, whereas we're allowing this. If everybody stood up tomorrow and said, no more of this, we're going to make massive awareness that we think there are agendas going on that are really harmful. If people stood up as one, it would end tomorrow. It's only because they don't believe they're powerful enough to do so that I believe it goes on.
But it's so simple to say that, Andy, but how the hell do you do it? Say everybody watching this program says, right, okay, I'll do it. And then they get up in the morning and they go, oh, what exactly do I do? How exactly do I do it?
Well, in the end of the book, I give very good examples of where massive change has occurred quickly and positively, where you'd least expect it. The Berlin Wall, the suffragette movement, who turned things around in 10, 20 years, you know, with votes for women. Nelson Mandela becoming president of South Africa, who saw that coming. Solidarity in Poland. They stood up against the communist forces, created massive change in Poland. All of this stuff going on. Even the Northern Ireland situation, when you look at where focused intent has tried to create healing and change, and enough people have stood up for that need for change, it happens. And there are practical examples in there of how this could occur. At the end of the day, we need to look at our lives and say, okay, if we're not happy with what's going on in the world, are we talking to people? Are we sharing this? Are we daring to say to the people that we work with or our families, I'm really not happy with what I'm being told in the news here. I don't think this is the whole story. As soon as you start to question, other people see you sticking your head up and think, oh, well, maybe I'll say what I think now. Because that's what I find at lectures. The more people that realise, oh, well, maybe I'm not the only one that thinks this, they then begin to share it. They then change their lives. They start to live more freely, more openly about their beliefs. And the more light is shone into shadow, the more people stand up and say, we really don't like the way the world is being governed, the less the people pulling the strings at the top can get away with it. And I truly believe, for instance, though you can say that the big peace protests against the Iraq war didn't work because we all went to war in Iraq, collectively speaking, I would like to think that, in fact, had people not taken to the streets in their masses and made their voice known about that, we probably would have been bombing Iran 2-3 years ago. It's when they know we care and enough people stand up to let it be known they care and that they want to make a difference. I truly believe it ties the hand of the elite, who are not all-knowing, who are not all-powerful. And I explore this in the book too. In a way, they probably have many disagreements within themselves. Our assumption that they are this big, scary, incredibly controlling thing is an assumption. They might like to be that, but we give them that power if we presume they are that powerful. And I don't think they are, and we need to take that back. we, I think, are more powerful than they are, and I think they fear us more than we fear them.
Andy, on that point, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to everyone for watching our show and for those who texted, and thanks to my very special guest, Andy Thomas. If you want more information, his website is vitalsignspublishing.co.uk. If you want to see him live, he is a speaker at Alternative View 3 in Bristol between 13th and 15th of November. Next week, we'll be back with yet another exciting show that might even change your life. Till then, remember, they're watching you, watching us, watching them. Cheerio.